Welcome to the gutter.
Thank you. It's
Everyone
great.
ends up here eventually. It's just a question of how long.
Exactly. Th-
So,
Thank you for having me on. I feel honored to be on the premiere episode, and it's great to be here.
absolutely, sometimes being first is not a good thing, though. So,
We'll iron out the kinks. We'll
all
get it
right.
down.
So, tonight we're talking your book, Jupiter, and the parallels or connections, or however we want to draw the inner workings here, between your book and the early career of Jack the King Kirby. So, through way back in January of 1972, there's a cultural epoch of tone that's reached, right? And it hits the apex of the proverbial charts. It's a parabolic song of pain and joy, recounting one man's processing of the day the music died. For comic fans, that day of mourning was not ever encapsulated in any kind of Billboard song. But February 6th, 1994 is a parallel of anguish for what was lost, and that's the day that Jack Kirby passed away. Um, Kirby is, in my opinion, and I hold to the Steranko school, which is that there are three men that are the foundation blocks of Western comics, and it's Jack Kirby, Joe Kubert, and of course Wallace Wood. Ironically, some of the things we'll be talking about today tie in Jack Kirby and Wally Wood. Exactly that beautiful, beautiful cartoon strip, comic strip, however you want to call it. But yes, so we've got Jack Kirby and we've got Jason Sandberg. And let's kind of dive in here for where do you want to start off at? Do you want to talk about your book a little bit? Give me an overarch. How were you inspired by Kirby? Was Kirby a major inspiration?
Absolutely. The first comic book that I remember buying was Captain America 214 in 1977. Bought it off the rack at the drugstore when my grandmother took me out for a shopping trip. That's the hey Nicholas. That is the first comic book I recall buying. And I know I saw Spider-Man and Batman on television, but that was the first comic book. And I'm very lucky because had it been some other title that maybe would have been more lackluster, I might not be where I am today in terms of being having so much joy and so much involvement with comic books. But it was essentially that Kirby artwork where I realized that there was like this magic trick that was happening. The magic trick of a two-dimensional image coming to life, becoming almost three-dimensional, and a static image having dynamism and force and gravity and volume and energy and movement. And in some regards, if I look at a piece of work by Jack Kirby, I find it more captivating than a motion picture. And so critically, Kirby is integral to my the beginning of my love of comics. And then with regard to Jupiter, which is live on Indiegogo, a lot of the book is in a modern style, modern artwork, but there's sections of the book where the characters are reading books by the Jack Kirby of this universe, as it were, and then I get the opportunity to kind of draw in his style. And I have so much fun doing it. So yeah, so Jack Kirby is important to me in terms of where I started with comic books, and then also with my current project. He's in my DNA as a creator.
Awesome, awesome. So we're on the right track here. We've got something going. So let me catch up with the chat just a little bit. Say hi to some folks. We got Nefarious, who apparently put his personal life and responsibilities ahead of actually attending the show and gracing the chat with his presence.
You're,
Not sure
you're
we'll ever forgive him, but
people.
we'll try. We'll
As
try.
a reminder, your family will be there tomorrow. We won't be.
Exactly.
We're here now. Your family, they'll be there tomorrow.
He makes a valid point. We have Unhinged continually reminding us all that he has uh, an immense, immense love for all of us. And sometimes it makes his pants feel a little bit tight. So we appreciate that.
For me, it's Phoebe Cates.
She's in the intro.
I know. Thank you
Yeah.
for that, by the way.
Yes, everybody's welcome for that. Oliver from 656 Comics. These boys, Cryptidinals, love it. Neff is such a tease, and Jason, we all love you. Oliver, we all love you too, buddy. And then,
Thank
of
you.
course, the one, the only, my favorite praying mantis DJ, Finatra. So good to see you, sir. And then, scrolling way down here, we've got Nicholas Greer. Great to see you, Nicholas Greer. And you know what, dude? I want to see Tin Soldier Kirby too. That's a great idea.
Funny you should say that. Nicholas actually backed the commission tier on the Jupiter campaign. There's a tier where I will take your character and I will channel my Kirby, and I'll draw your character in the style of Jack Kirby to the best of my humble ability. And then if you use it for a pinup or as a variant cover, I'm fine. Part of the reason I homage Kirby is that I want to keep his visual vocabulary alive. It's alive in reprints, so Marvel will forever reprint his work, and DC will. But contemporarily, there's not a lot of artists that are homaging him, and there's a small strata of us that do it, like Tom Scioli. But I want to keep doing it and spread that joy for that Kirby energy, keep his visual vocabulary alive.
Gotcha. Well, we do have something that's it's going to be pretty fantastic. And before we get into that, let me welcome my good friend, my actual co-host, the guy that's usually holding the keys to Dad's Thunderbird, Jeremy Ice and Fire. Welcome, my friend. Thank you for letting me tolerate or take over your channel for a little bit.
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's your channel as much as it is mine at this point. This is a community car at this point.
Jeremy, he warned me we had to bring it back with a full tank of gas. So he made that clear.
You got drop the bitches off and wipe down the seats. All right. Well, where I was going, Jeremy, we're just getting started here, and we're gonna rap a little bit about early Kirby and his career, pretty much right up until like when everybody knows of Kirby, and that's essentially the early 60s. Mm-hmm. So I kind of wanted to do a little bit of a crash course here in under 60 minutes on what went on in the later portion of the 30s, the 40s, and especially I really want to talk about the 50s because that's the era where Jack really gets going. But when it comes to Jack Kirby's art, I mean, I went to a Steranko dinner just last weekend, and man, I've got great.
That's right. We still haven't even talked about that.
Oh
That's
man,
right.
It's epic. But I've got great clips of Jim talking about what Kirby meant to him. I've got quotes where I talked to Michael Golden last year on what Kirby meant to him, where I jotted down notes, and I could do all that. But I don't think that's respectful enough to the man. So I think we need to listen to what Jack had to say about his art.
Oh.
Mr. Kirby, why do you think your artwork is so popular?
My artwork is popular because it connects with the ordinary person, and they can understand it very easily. And I've always meant it to be so. I've never confined my art to a particular section of humanity. I love people in general. My art reflects it. And that's the way it's always been.
So that's the man himself right there telling you that's the way it's always been. He's always taken that approach to his art. Now, there's another famous quote. I don't actually have him saying it. I just have multiple references to it. Kirby left school at the age of 16, and his justification for doing so was he intended to get things done, and he wasn't happy with how everybody else wanted him to do things. He wanted to do his own things.
Break the mold.
Exactly. So in 1936, he gets his first actual job, and he goes to work for Horace Elmo's Lincoln Newspaper Syndicate. And what the Lincoln Newspaper Syndicate is they were obviously a syndicate that provided cartoons for actual like newspaper groups. So whatever newspaper needed it in particular at that time. The kind of thing that he was doing at that time was really, it's best if I just show you because you're really.
And this was his first pen names too, right? The time he had to come up with pen names.
Yeah, most of this is going to be Jack Curtis. These are all Jack Curtis's works. And we're going to pull this up right here. Oop, there we go. All right. So these are Your Health Comes First. And these were little cartoons that were done, and they're so era appropriate. But the cool part about them is, as you look at this art, you can see early Kirbyisms already starting to form in 1936 to 1939. Now, he didn't exclusively just work on these Your Health Comes First. He did 3-panel strips. He would do not so much political cartoons, but political social cartoons, anything that was needed at the time. He was basically just the resident cartoonist, and they would put this kind of stuff up. So as we look through these, they're just kind of fun. There's nothing that's really stand out of going like, oh man, they're just fun. And really the most important thing is you get aspects of what is coming, and you can see the development as you go through these. And there's something pretty special. I enjoy looking through them. I've never seen too many people actually highlight them for whatever reason. But when you look at them, it's definitely something that you don't normally see. So.
And I think I recall seeing that he did some illustrations for like Ripley's Believe It or Not, where they'd do some freak of nature, and they would have him draw it as part of a feature in the syndicate. I think I've seen some of those from time to time.
Gotcha. I did not have time to grab any of those. It's kind of a miracle I got these. So he's doing that. So he goes to work for there, and he's there for a couple of years. And then he does something that's kind of strange. He jumps over and works for, of all places, one of my personal favorite animation studios, the studio that revolutionizes, in my opinion, commercial animation still to this day. The ripples of this are still echoing out. Fleischer Studios, the probably most famous. They should be famous for their 1937 Gulliver's Travels, which is just fantastic. But they're more famous for, of course, the first, I think, 8 Superman cartoons, but that they showed in theaters before films. Actually, some of which I'm highlighting on my channel. I think I'm only halfway through. But so he works there. And Jason, you want to talk a little bit about what he worked on there?
Yeah, he was an in-betweener. So he wouldn't do the principal poses, but he would do the in-between animations on the films, and then they'd be photographed, obviously, to create the effect of animation. I don't know if he worked on the Superman shorts, but he certainly was there. I know at a later time he worked on Popeye, but yeah, he was an in-betweener.
Yeah, most of all the work that he did when he was at Fleischer was all on Betty Boop and Popeye. He never worked on anything else that we know of. Now, Fleischer was real fast and loose in the time period that he was there, which was really just 1939. It's unlikely that he touched any of the Superman stuff because that really didn't get going. And Paramount gave him the money in 40. So he could have been working on some of the preliminary stuff, but all of the historical documentation and everything that both the Fleischer Museum and the Fleischer family have says that the Fleischer brothers kept that pretty close to the vest until they actually got the check from Paramount, because they never dreamed that they'd actually get it. And actually, in a roundabout way. And man, if you're a Fleischer fan, we should do this sometime. That ended up bankrupting the studio. It ended up causing a ton of problems.
Wow.
Because it's one of those where, you give the poor man a bunch of money and suddenly all my dreams are going to come trues. And you end up right back where you started, which is here at this show in the gutter.
In the gutter.
So he works as an in-betweener for Fleischer Animation. That doesn't last long. But 1941, he ends up teaming up with Joe Simon, which ends up being arguably probably his longest period of collaboration with any one individual, because this lasts well into the later portion of the 1950s. So you're talking over 15 years. He doesn't even last this long with Stan. For multiple reasons, mostly Stan, but we'll get into that in another show too. But so Kirby's he teams up with Joe Simon. He ends up going to work for a small little company owned by Goodman called Timely. And they create a couple of characters. You may have heard like Captain America around this time comes out. And right about the time things are getting going, boom, Pearl Harbor happens, and Kirby goes into the military. And I'm not going to spend too much time on what he did in the military, but Kirby served his country, and then he came back. And it's post-war. He teams back up with Simon, who he never lost touch with. And he starts making comics again. Now, prior to this, he had made a few, but not seriously, and nothing stuck. But now he starts making comics. And the first ones of any relevance are for Timely in 1947 with 1946 No, 47. I'm sorry, it is 47. They started it in 46. And you know what? I think again here, I think we probably should just let Kirby speak for himself.
Well, romance comics was an innovation. I passed the newsstands every night on my way to deliver stuff to Marvel, and these love magazines would be hanging on the newsstands, and I thought nothing of it until one night it suddenly dawned on me that the love pulps were covering the newsstands, and I realized that there were no romance magazines in comics. And that's when Joe Simon and I began to turn out magazines like My Date, Young Romance, and similar magazines, and we got a very, very good response.
So now, Jason, one of the things I really keyed in on with your book is in Jupiter you have a female protagonist, and to a degree, it's not all the rage, but it certainly seems commonplace now that it's well beyond 50-50. I mean, I think it kind of leans almost more in the indie sphere that you have a female protagonist. What was part of the Kirby changeover? Because here he saw, to his point, he's walking by all these newsstands and he sees, look, this is what's selling, but he's looking at his competition in comics and nobody's doing it. What makes your female protagonists different than all the other female protagonists? How are you looking to reach out and grab that audience that's not being utilized?
So in Jupiter, it takes place in a world where there aren't any superheroes. It's not crowded like the DC or Marvel universe, where there's dozens of superheroes and they're all standing around talking about scalded coffee and stuff like that. It's a world where there's no superheroes, and I wanted to portray the hero's journey. And similar to Joss Whedon with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the idea is take someone who's physically vulnerable and have them go along a hero's journey and incrementally become more powerful and have the stakes rise. So that to me is intriguing because in literature, in entertainment, you want to empathize with the characters, but you also want them to be in jeopardy, because if they're in jeopardy, then there's stakes, right? There's consequences.
Gotta have stakes, yeah.
Exactly. So that was part of it, and then additionally, because the other part of Jupiter is that Jack Kirby's kind of bombastic superheroes, I knew I was going to have Captain Kleinbottle in there as the other pole. So I said, well, I'm going to do the opposite of Captain Kleinbottle. I'm going to do a young lady, and she's actually mixed race. Her mother's from Mexico, or her father's of European descent. So she's female, younger, and she's younger, and then he's kind of a white bread, all American man, right? And big, strong football player type guy. So that was another thing, is to create that polarity, right? So that was kind of my inspiration to say, who do I want this character to be who's going to take this heroic journey?
Gotcha. So you're looking at it as a heroic journey. Kirby and Simon are out there looking at, like, man, how are we going to break in? Because at this time the market's cutthroat. It's 1947. The pulps are dying and comics are exploding.
Because there was, there were. I can't recall if the war comics had kind of petered out, but there was certainly crime. There were crime comics, like true crime comics.
Oh, yeah. We're going to get into that.
Yep.
We're going to get into that real quick here when we hit mainline. Because, in fact, we can just jump right now, because in 47, like Kirby just talked about, and like you kind of alluded to, Kirby and Simon sit down and create Young Love. And Young Love is arguably the first romance comic in the Western world, and overnight explodes. And at this time period, it's not too different from now. If somebody does a vampire book that explodes, everybody's doing vampire books. Somebody does a werewolf book, everything explodes. But the glut that you see in romance and just soap opera style comics starts with Jack Kirby and Joe Simon. and arguably the art is really good. And we're going to get into that here quickly because they're working for a bunch of different companies as contractors. And by 1954, Kirby and Simon kind of look at each other and go, well, we should just create our own company. And thus Mainline Comics is born. And Mainline Comics is born with 4 titles. And this, Jason, is where it ties into what you were saying, because at the time period, there's 4 main tropes, 4 main topics that are selling. And it's the previously mentioned romance comics, Westerns, war comics, and of course the following, or what the detective pulp evolved into, which is the detective crime police procedural comic. And these exist even arguably to this day. I mean, you can argue this is kind of like where Sandman Mystery Theater fits in. Whether you're a fan of what is it? It's the Hollywood. I'm sorry, Ed Brubaker and Phillips.
Yep,
What they
yep.
do with kind of their crime, the
Yep.
criminal, Stray Bullets. This is the nascent birth of them. And Kirby and Simon are going.
Sin
Go ahead.
City to some
Yeah.
Sin City to some extent.
Well, arguably, I think Frank Miller mines this hard. This whole era, the early 50s style of crime books, he really gets it. Obviously a different style of art, but for sure the tonal procedural of how the story evolves. So Mainline Comics is formed, and I'm just going to throw up some titles here because these are exceptional. And when I say exceptional, there's few things that you can actually say are that good. But man, these are from 1954. So their Western comic was called Bullseye. And these covers are all Jack Kirby. And this is just amazing when you stylistically for 1954.
It looks like a Steranko design,
It is. Well, it contains, it's the 2/3 rule. He's doing that with the bullseye. You've got a classic action shot of the hero coming at you with the 2/3 rule. Everything works as far as the structure of it. But if you compare this, and man, you know what? I should, hindsight 2020, I should have pulled up a bunch of comics from this era to compare this to. But this jumps off the stand at you, no different than some of those early Image titles did. Jump directly off the stand. It's an epic style. And really, to a degree, Jason, I think you've kind of got something similar going on with the stylistic design of your book, Jupiter, which is, if you want to hold that up again.
Yeah.
There you go. And you're going to see this time and time again. And here's the sad part. Mainline lasts about a year. None of their titles, all their titles got between 4 to 6 issues. Kirby did the designs, did the covers for all of them. And then they closed out and they sold to Carlton Comics. And Carlton Comics continued them. Carlton didn't even make it 4 issues on most of these titles after they took over, because a strange thing happens in 1955. And 1955 is when Wortham happens, and you get the Comics Code, and the bottom falls out of the comics market. So these are all still Bullseye, and I'm just going to go through these pretty fast here. These are the covers, and you'll see the last. There's a huge difference. These are the last of the mainline covers, and then we get right into this, which, if you notice in the upper right-hand corner, there it is, April 1955. We now have the Comics Code label. Now, interestingly enough, Mainline was super small. They never really got a huge distribution. Their sales numbers weren't great, but their books almost exclusively were used in the hearings in place of what Warner was putting out, because their books were worse in a lot of ways.
Okay.
Not violent, but the story content. And it wasn't Bullseye. Bullseye is kind of a friendly, everyday story. The one that they chose to use was actually their war comic, which was Foxhole. And if you ever get a chance to check out any republished mainline books, I highly recommend you check out Foxhole. Another one that's in the same vein as this was done, but it's called Blazing Combat. It had 4 issues, and it was done in the late 60s and early 70s, and it's the same tone. And the similarities between the two are they are comics about war done by veterans. They are not Michael Golden's Nam that has a sense of honor and a sense of nobility about war. These show you that war is hell. There are dead and maimed people everywhere. And this is what they were flagging for Wortham. This was not what the committee wanted to see children reading. They wanted to still celebrate the nobility of war. And so you've got the guys in the foxhole, or just Foxhole. And this was a fairly not revolutionary book, but it was pretty brutal.
That's very interesting because whenever I would hear recollections of the Wortham and the hearings, I always thought it was the horror comics, like the EC horror comics, and to have you tell me no, it's actually some of it was the realism of the war comics. That's an interesting angle I was unaware of.
Yeah, you see definitely the horror books for sure always get the notoriety, but no, these were all pulled up and are on the hearing. You can go in Congressional Record and see reference to these books. I did want to stop on this cover. This is one of my favorite covers, drawn by Jack Kirby. This is so far ahead of its time for 1955 that it's not even funny. This is a 1970s, 1980s bronze copper age cover, done in 1955 at the birth of the Silver Age, arguably the end of the Golden Age. So, and you just don't see this. This is how far ahead Kirby is from his compatriots at the time, and what him and Simon are doing over at Mainline was truly something special. Just because we mentioned it earlier, and before we move on, I do want to highlight these. And everybody laughs. Oh, Jack Kirby did romance comics. Just look at the art on these. The layout of them is brilliant. He's doing a book on a cover to draw in the reader, because again, people at this time are buying the pulp romance novels. So what he's doing is he's actually marketing it as a book, not a comic. And these sold really well. This was one of the things that Mainline really could push.
Yeah, and the number of imitators speaks to how well they were doing, because like you said, I've seen pictures of the newsstand, and it's all romance comics and so forth. So it was definitely making an impact.
Yep. So these are just great when you look at them. And this is the only one I could find that is a Mainline book that this is not a Jack Kirby cover. We don't know who did it, and that's the other problem with Mainline. We've got questionable interior art, and we don't know who did some of the interiors, and we don't know all the books that Kirby worked on, and we don't know all the ones that he didn't work on. We do know the ones that are signed, and so those are the ones that I was trying to highlight there. Excuse me. The last one that we can talk about here is Police Trap, and Police Trap is the crime book. This book's it's a weird mixed bag, because it starts off as one thing. It's a mini crime anthology, and by the end, it's a gritty detective novel story. And then Carlton didn't know what to do with it, and they kind of just mixed bag everything when they took it off. This book was the book that lasted the longest at Mainline, and it did have a pretty good following. It just didn't carry over when Carlton took it on. I do want to talk about this cover a little bit, mainly because in the precursor, in the pre-intro, I highlight Dan Dare. Dan Dare was the precursor to Buck Rogers. He was Britain's answer to Flash Gordon, so to speak. And that style that you see that main character standing, that is a Dan Dare pose. And you can talk in this era a little bit about, well, they don't have the internet, so how does he have access to what's going on in Eagle across? But here's the thing, this is 1954. Eagle's only been around for about a year and a half, and he's replicating a pose on this. Now, the other fun thing, if you look at Howard Chaykin when he launches Black Flag. Yeah, it's the same pose. He's using the same pose. So this is like, the doors are named after Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception, and The Doors of Perception, Huxley named that book because of a line and rhyme of The Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. You've got it right here. I can go from Dan Dare to Kirby's Police Trap all the way up to what Chaikin's doing in the 70s right here. And it's all right in your face, but it's so cool to see that history and have it right there. Again, you get the standard Kirby faces, you get the standard Kirby lines, and just that great layout, always understanding the 2/3 right in your face, the triangles present. It's just exceptional cover work. And for 1954, well above anything that you'd expect. Since I've been since I've been ignoring them, I want to make sure I do spend a little bit of time to greet some people that showed up. Arrogant Ape has joined us. Thank you, sir. When the apes take over, I hope you remember us as the filthy humans that we are. Matt Barr, my favorite Emmy award-winning artist. Great to see you, man. Thanks for stopping by. Eric Grant. Can't stay, so I'm stopping by to say hi. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Always a pleasure to see you, sir. So let's talk a little bit more about Jupiter. So you've got 7 days left on the campaign.
Yep.
Now this is something that you've had around for a while too.
So I did it as a black and white indie in the 90s. This iteration is all new material, and this is all full color. So it's 40 pages for $10, and if you back, you get a non-prize. Not to be confused with the no prize. So this is the non-prize, and all this, I'm a man of honor. I would never lie. There's flipping nothing in the non-prize. But just like there was the Marvel Comics no prize, I've got the non-prize. So in terms of the basic tier, $10, you get this 40-page comic book and the non-prize. Pretty good deal there. The story itself, I mentioned earlier that it's this heroic journey in a world without superheroes, but they do read comic books, and they read Jack Kirby comic books. At this point, do you want me to kind of zoom in on this back cover so people can kind of see how this dovetails into the topic tonight?
For sure. Let me.
All right. So this is Captain Kleinbottle, and he's the character, the comic book character inside the comic book. And you'll see at the top that I have basically said we talked about the 4 titles that were published by Mainline, and that's in our world. In the world of Jupiter, there was a 5th title, and that 5th title was about an astronaut named Captain Kleinbottle. And what happened in the world of Jupiter, that 5th title skyrocketed, and they didn't have the distribution issues and so forth. And this 5th character that Kirby and Simon and Kirby created, Captain Kleinbottle, became a phenomenon. And in the world of Jupiter, Jack Kirby stayed at Mainline, owned Mainline. It was his company, and profited from his work. And he incrementally became that universe's Walt Disney, and all of the crazy, wacky ideas that he later gave to Marvel and DC, he kept them at Mainline. And Mainline in this particular issue is 289, right? So in the world of Jupiter, he's chugging away. He's putting all of his crazy, brilliant, wacky Kirby ideas into Captain Kleinbottle, and it continues on. And so this is in some respects, this is part of the story because it's diegetic. It's the comic within a comic. But on another level, it's me saying, well, I've got this alternate reality where things worked out differently for Kirby, where he didn't have the legal issues with Marvel, and he didn't have the rights issues, and he was was not concerned about his income and his livelihood, because he profited from basically his creator-owned material. And in the world of Jupiter, there's he's like a Walt Disney figure. And there's the Kirby land where people can go as a family vacation, and they can see all the different rides and stuff like that. So that is kind of why this Jupiter in this kind of backdoor way is connected to Kirby's early year leading up to the time at Mainline.
Gotcha. Well, and I love that we can draw these parallels. I love that you built upon the actual history, that you went back and heralded the greatest part. And I don't have a clip of it, but Kirby does talk in a couple of his interviews about he really regretted everything that happened with Mainline, because one of the things that happened with Mainline, in their romance books, they republish stories that were done that they did for another title, another publisher. And that got them into legal trouble, and that got them into financial trouble, and that's why they had to walk away. So it's the mid 50s, and Kirby and Simon, they're pretty much done at this point working together. So Kirby's looking around. He's got some notoriety. People know who he is because, again, he put Love Comics on the map. I mean, those things sold. He's not the equivalent of Rob Liefeld because obviously he can draw feet, but he's of that notoriety right now within mid 90s comicdom of general culture. People know who Jack Kirby is. And by this point, he is firmly settled on Jack Kirby as his pen name. Right up until the early 50s, he's still jumping around between Jay Curtis, Jack Curtis, John Curtis. He is settled on Kirby. He's using Kirby. And while he's doing some contract work for National is the company that will become DC. Comics. He's doing some contract work for them, and he comes across a pair of brothers. And those brothers are writers for National, also contract. And they get to talking. And they're like, we'd love to do our own thing. Jack's like, yeah, I'd love to do my own thing. This whole Mainline thing didn't work out. And so the brothers are the Wood brothers. No relation to Wally Wood. But in an ultimate irony, Wally Wood ends up getting involved in the project. And the project is Sky Masters of the Space Force. And Kirby goes all the way back to 1936 to 1939, uses the connections that he had when he was working for Horace Elmo and the newspaper syndicate to get Sky Masters into the newspaper comic syndicate. And it sells really well for about the first year. And then he starts getting into a disagreement with some of the people involved in it. But he got Wally Wood to ink it. So there's very few comics out there that are newspaper strips that you can say this about. But Sky Masters and the Space Force was penciled by Jack Kirby and inked by Wally Wood. And this is late 50s. And he's got Wally Wood inking him. And the only reason that Wally's doing it is because Jack called him up and asked him to. Because Jack saw Wally Wood ink. This is another story. Will Eisner coming out of the war. The Spirit sails are down. They do a big swing. They flip it. We're going to send the Spirit in space. And they do a huge arc where the Spirit's in space. Well, Wally Wood did a bunch of work for Weird Fantasy and Weird Science and did a bunch of sci-fi work in the late 40s. Eisner sees that, has him do these Spirit pages. These Spirit pages are huge. Everybody loves them. Kirby sees those. Immediately when he's thinking of who he wants to ink, he picks up the phone and gets a hold of Wally. Wally, of course, jumps over because he knows at this time, this is the wild part. Jack Kirby is more well-known than Wally Wood because Wally Wood's the kid to Jack's senior artist. So Kirby gets to work with Wally Wood in the series, and it's done really well. They do about 18 months, and then Wally leaves because the drama is getting too much. And if you follow Wally Wood's career at all, that's Wally's life. Every time things get just a little tenuous and there's somebody's yelling at somebody else, he just walks, and it always works out for Wally until much later in his career. So. Later on, Dick Ayers takes over the inking work on Sky Masters, and I do have a couple of panels because if there is anything you take away from this, I really want people to go and check this out. Sky Masters of the Space Force is something that's truly special and is not talked about nearly enough. When we talked about the four things that Mainline had, they were missing one. And the one topic that sold really, really well, but not nearly as well as the other four, but was consistent in its sales, whereas all the other ones ebbed and flowed, was science fiction stories. And we alluded to it a little bit with Dan Dare and that police cover. Those science fiction stories, you got to remember this is the late 50s. The Flash is still going. They're on their fourth cartoonist by the late 50s. Buck Rogers is still in syndication. Alex Raymond's long gone. He's already died in a car accident, but his creation is still a #1 strip in America. And this strip's competing with it for about a year. Once the talent starts kind of drifting away from the strip, it dips in quality a little bit, and it's seen, and its readership dies off. But the art in these is just exceptional. And in my opinion, one of the failures that comic people and comic fans do often is they don't appreciate the comic strips of this era. Arguably, they don't even appreciate the comic strips. Well, comic strips died as soon as Bill Watterson retired. There's been no innovation. Everything's ground to a halt. You might as well just burn the whole industry. Watterson was the apex of it. Calvin and Hobbes was brilliant. But I do want to point this out. This is actually the strip that's on the Wikipedia page as well. And it's probably the best example of what Kirby and Wally were doing. And this is a 4-panel comic strip vertically that is done in Will Eisner's Spirit style. It's the 4 tiers of the rocket ship. The ladder is the spine with the manhole going all the way down. You have one character being broken in half by the gutter. And it's just absolutely brilliant. And this is being done in 1958. Now, I would argue that there is nothing in Sky Masters that you don't see revolutionized until like the 90s. And even then, they're stealing. Well, I'll be a little nicer. They're borrowing heavily from what these guys are doing. A lot of this stuff's just forgotten, and then you'll see guys harken back to it and not give any credit.
Sure.
There is no difference in my mind. If you take a piece of paper and you use a light box and you directly trace somebody's image, that's theft if you don't give them credit. Well, actually, you know what? Tracing's theft. If you want to homage something, that's great. The same thing's true with somebody's layout. If you steal somebody's layout idea, give them credit. Because stuff like this is revolutionary, and these people need to get credit. They already didn't get paid for most of the stuff that they did. They don't own any of this. The Kirby estate's not making a whole lot of money off this. If they're making a nickel, at least put their name at the bottom if you're going to allude or draw over a comparison or borrow from it. I think that's the least you can do. And I know, Jason, you've talked to me about that before, that, you really do that with your book, that anytime you see something like that, you always want to harken back and make sure you give credit to where credit is due. Yeah.
When you look at my Kirby homage stuff, it's unmistakably Kirby. It's clear. I'm not cheating by looking at his stuff and kind of picking up the visual vocabulary. It's I can draw a car, I could draw anything. I'm purposely doing this to celebrate, right? And I'm not, basically, if you look at the sections of Jupiter that are the Kirby sections, I'm not fooling anybody. They can see right there that bing, this is certainly a Kirby vibe, and it's celebrating Kirby.
Fantastic. So we've kind of reached the end of the 50. Obviously, Sky Masters ends. That whole run ends. And, he starts, that's really now is when the story starts of what everybody knows of Kirby. And we left a lot out. I mean, he bounced between Atlas and Timely and National, and all throughout this period, I felt we kind of covered the broad strokes. I think a lot of it, and this is, you want to do that?
Yeah. Well, I just want to mention that he and Wally Wood got together a few more times. Wally Wood inked some of the Challenge of the Unknown. And go seek these out too, because I think this is obviously this is right before it was before the Fantastic Four and before some of the monster comics, but the Challenge of the Unknown, I think it's obviously it's a monthly book, so he wasn't able to lavish the attention on it that he was able to put on Sky Masters, but there's
arguable. This actually comes before Sky Masters. The pitch for Challengers was first pitched to National in 1955.
Okay.
and they didn't pick it up until showcase number 6, 57,
Okay.
is the first issue of Challengers, and it bounces around. It's all over the place until it finally starts to hit its groove. There's some argument as well if Simon was involved. Dave Wood was definitely involved, because if you read Sky Masters, and like when you're finished with Sky Masters, you immediately jump over to Challengers and read it. There's no doubt in your mind that's written by Wood.
Got it.
Dave Wood, not Wally Wood.
Yep.
Want to clarify that. There's a lot of, and that's something going back to Sky Masters. Every comic in Sky Masters is signed Kirby Wood. And there are a lot of people out there that, because Wally Wood inked it for about 18 months, that think that the whole series is Wally and Jack, and it's not. I do want to point that out, because the Wood brothers that wrote it need to get their just due. They did a really good job on it, and Kirby is the penciler. Wood is the writer.
Okay.
Just so that's clarified. I that happened twice after I dropped my tweet today. So I'm like, oh man. And I've seen it. It bothers me most when I'm at a con and I walk by strips and like, oh, Wally Wood. Like, no, that's a David Ayers one.
Yep, it is Dick and Dave Wood right there. So you're dead on there.
Yeah, and that book that you hold up, you want to hold that up again?
Yeah.
I do want to give that a shout out.
Oh.
All right, so this is about 272 pages. It retails for about $40. If you look around, you can usually get it used for like 25. It is fantastic. It is every strip in that series. There's again questions on legal ownership when you get into some comic strips. Fortunately, with Sky Masters, there's none of that, and so you have a full published licensed copy of a book that you can just go online and buy. If you're a comic fan, if you're a Jack Kirby fan, if you're an art fan, if you're a human being that still is breathing and above ground, buy it. My God, you need to. It's the best $40 you'll ever spend. It's just absolutely beautiful. But yeah, so Challenges of the Unknown was fantastic. When he got with Wally, that was a little later. That was, I think, that was the later 50s.
Yep.
But yeah, that's a great series. I'd really, I could have restructured the show and we could have talked about that. Now I'm kicking myself.
Well, and then just before he goes back to Martin Goodman, he has a run on the Green Arrow, and he didn't create the Green Arrow, but there's an omnibus that was published a while back, and I found his Green Arrow. The artwork is beautiful. The artwork is beautiful. It's got the energy of the early FF, and the
hold it up, man. See some of that.
The ideas and so forth, and again, he's kind of running with the is this a poor man's Batman in terms of the vehicles and stuff like that. But don't snicker. The Green Arrow, the Kirby Green Arrow, I think it's great. I think it's great comics. It's wonderful pre-Marvel Silver Age. It's wonderful. So go seek that out. I think there was a trade published of just the Green Arrow stories, but I think they're. I mean, years ago when I read those, I was kind of going in skeptical. I'm like, oh, Green Arrow, come on, and I dug them. It was good. It was good stuff.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar. By the time National switches over to DC, and then Kirby's 1, 2, 3, be his third. His third round over there. Man, I'm not that familiar with that. Most of the time I've always spent is Sky Masters, and then I immediately jump over to his time at Atlas before they become Marvel. So very good, man. But Jupiter is definitely in this vein. You are hitting those tones of this era, which is arguably it's the golden age. It's the precursor to probably the dwindling time of the golden age. But you're certainly starting to see those modern elements that you see. Go ahead.
And in Jupiter, when I talked about the diegetic Captain Klein bottle within the comic, when I do those pages, I'm drawing like Kirby, but then I'm also coloring with the 64 color palette that Bronze Age Marvel had, and putting over like a paper filter. So it has the visually it's kind of got the tactile feel. Let me move my mic.
Oh, that looks good. You definitely are hitting the tones that you want to hit, and I love the layout structure. No, see that one on the upper left or upper right is just that's fantastic. Very nice, very nice. You need to move your mic back. Still can't hear you.
I hit mute.
So
I hit
there-
mute. Sorry.
So no problem. So Jupiter is you got 7 days left. You're really doing well. You came off maybe not the greatest initial funding launch, but you've just kept on rolling. Most people they'll say your first 3 days you're going to hit like 80%. You didn't. You hit like around 2, and you're almost at 4.
Yep.
Your backers have exploded. I really, really want to compliment you on
Thank
the
you.
price point that you're talking about and the general layout of your campaign.
Yep.
I know,
$10
you can't beat $10
for
man.
40 pages.
This isn't 25 for 48. This is 10 for 40. Yes, it's a floppy, but it looks really good. You're hitting excellent homages to the styles that you love. It comes across in everything that you're doing. And sir, I wish you the best. And
Thank you.
it was fantastic talking about the early history of Jack Kirby and how it parallels to your work and how it inspired you.
Thank you. I always love talking to you. Love hanging out with you. I appreciate it. And those that are watching, one last item. We talked about the Kirby mainline comics, and we talked about my homage to Kirby's mainline era with this Captain Kleinbottle character. There is a $5,000 stretch goal, and right now we're at $3,500. So it's within reach the last 7 or 8 days. If you back and we get to 5,000, every backer is going to get this Captain Kleinbottle fan club membership card, which is apropos because we're talking about mainline comics, and this is my Jack Kirby astronaut character from the 50s. So I'm hoping we get to 5,000. Everybody can get this little memento here, but it's free if we can get to 5,000.
Fantastic. Well, before we leave, I think it's only fair because we talked a lot about what we thought about Jack's work. He's Jack the King Kirby. I think it's only fair that we give him a shot to speak a little bit about his own work.
Absolutely.
Well, my first comic book work, it involved comics that didn't last long until I finally began to work on Captain America. I began to work on the early stuff at Marvel Comics, which is at that time known as Timely Comics. I met my former partner, Joe Simon, at that time, and we began to do very well together. We did work for DC magazines. We did work for Harvey magazines. And generally, I brought home my paycheck and I was quite content.
And I think if there's any summation of the early period of Kirby, I think that says it right there. He brought home his paycheck and he was generally quite content. So, and if there's anything that we covered that you'd like any information on, please DM either one of us, leave a comment. By all means, like and subscribe. Otherwise, Jason, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Your passion for this medium, comics in general, comes across every time I talk to you. I appreciate that. I don't hear nearly enough of it, and it's always refreshing when I do. So
thank you, sir. I enjoy talking to you. Every time I talk to you, I walk away with a list of movies and books and comics I got to track down. And I love your taste, and I love your observations and your turn of phrase. It's always wonderful to hang out with you. So thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, sir, for being here on the inaugural episode of The Gutter. And thank you to everybody in the chat for showing up and tolerating our short conversation on Jack Kirby's early career and Jason Sandberg's Jupiter. Have a good night, all. Bow.
The gutter.
Thank you, sir.